I'll never forget the moment I stepped into that grand reception hall, the dazzling lights, the soft hum of laughter, and then the crushing sting of betrayal that hit me like a freight train. In the first 100 words of that day, my ex, the man I once loved, began mocking my simple life as if it were a punchline at his wedding. "Oh, look at you, still living in your little apartment and wearing those thrift store threats," he sneered to his friends, loud enough for everyone to hear. I stood frozen, heart pounding in disbelief, as his callous words sliced through the air. But nothing prepared me for what came next, the reaction from his bride, a moment so unexpected that it would forever alter the course of my life. It started as a day that promised celebration, a wedding that, by all appearances, should have been filled with joy and hope. I had received an invitation months ago, not because we were close, but because he insisted I attend as a favor. I wasn't exactly surprised when I learned he'd moved on and found someone new, but I never imagined that his new bride would be the one to challenge the cruelty of his words. I arrived at the venue in a modest, comfortable outfit that reflected my life, simple, honest, and unpretentious. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, I just wanted to be there, to see for myself how life had turned out for him. As I mingled with the other guests, friends of his from college, a few co-workers, and a handful of acquaintances, I couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. The room was filled with opulence, shimmering chandeliers, tables laden with gourmet delicacies, and conversations buzzing with excitement about the future. Yet, in the midst of all that glitz, I felt my own world shrink into insignificance. I clutched my glass of wine, wondering why I had even come. I had my own life, quiet, steady, maybe even a bit uneventful, but it was mine, and I'd always found comfort in its simplicity. Then came the turning point. As the couple took their first dance, a subtle murmur began to circulate through the crowd. I overheard snippets of conversation, some guests chuckling at the way he casually referred to me, some gasping in disbelief at the audacity of his jokes. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, not out of anger alone, but because I felt utterly exposed, as if my very existence were up for public auction. I couldn't understand how the man who once promised to cherish me could now reduce my life to a source of amusement. The hurt was raw and immediate, a wound that cut deeper than any physical injury. I took a few deep breaths, trying to steady my nerves, when a soft, unexpected voice broke through the din. It was his bride. While everyone around her had been laughing or shrugging off his harsh remarks, she stood there with a calm, almost pained expression on her face. In a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, she stepped forward and said, loud enough for all to hear, "Excuse me, but I think we should be respectful tonight. Everyone here deserves kindness, and mocking someone's way of life isn't kind, it's just plain hurtful." Her words, firm yet compassionate, halted the laughter and hushed the murmurs. I watched as the room shifted, a few people exchanged awkward glances, and even my ex looked momentarily taken aback, his smirk faltering. Her intervention wasn't dramatic in the sense of a grand speech, but it was powerful in its sincerity. It was as if, in that moment, she had reminded everyone that behind every simple life is a story worth respecting. I felt a surge of relief, mixed with gratitude that someone, especially someone who was supposed to be on his side, had the decency to stand up for me. I wasn't sure if she truly understood my situation or if she was simply trying to smooth over an awkward moment, but her words resonated with me deeply. After that, the wedding took on a different tone. The laughter became more measured, the conversations more thoughtful. I found myself drawn into a quiet conversation with a few guests who, like me, had been visibly affected by the exchange. They talked about the importance of empathy, of not judging others by the simplicity of their lives. I listened, feeling a kinship that I hadn't expected to find at an event meant to celebrate someone else's joy. For the first time that evening, I began to see that maybe I wasn't as insignificant as his harsh words had suggested. Maybe my life, in its humble, unassuming way, held a quiet dignity that was often overlooked by those dazzled by superficial success. That realization didn't erase the sting of his mockery, but it planted a seed of defiance in me, a determination to prove that my simple life was not something to be mocked, but something to be celebrated. I left the wedding that night with mixed emotions. I was hurt, certainly, but also strangely empowered. I had seen a side of his new bride that I hadn't expected: compassion, integrity, and a willingness to stand up for what was right. And in that moment, I began to question everything about the man who once meant so much to me. As I walked out into the cool night air, the city lights blurred around me like a moving painting, I realized that I was at a crossroads. I could let the pain of that evening define me, or I could use it as the impetus to build a life that was true to who I am, a life where I wouldn't let anyone's narrow view diminish my worth. The memory of her words, spoken with quiet strength, echoed in my mind, urging me to reclaim my identity and stand tall in the face of ridicule. That night marked the beginning of a journey where I would explore what it meant to live a simple life unapologetically, to find joy in the everyday, and to build a future that reflected my values, not someone else's judgment. I decided then that I wasn't going to let that moment at his wedding break me. Instead, I was going to let it be the catalyst for change, a turning point that pushed me to embrace my authenticity, celebrate my humble beginnings, and ultimately, prove that there's beauty in simplicity. I headed home, not with a heart full of bitterness, but with a mind buzzing with ideas and a spirit ready to fight for its place in the world. I knew it wouldn't be an easy road, the scars of that night were still fresh, and the journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty. But I also knew that sometimes, the hardest moments in life are the ones that force you to grow, to reinvent yourself, and to truly understand what matters most. And as I looked up at the starry sky, I promised myself that I would never let anyone's mockery define the richness of my life again. After leaving that unforgettable wedding, I spent days, and sometimes weeks, swirling in a mix of raw emotions and unexpected clarity. In the aftermath of hearing my ex's cruel words and witnessing his bride's stunning, unexpected defense, my head was a constant storm of thoughts. I kept replaying that moment over and over, the way she, with quiet dignity, told everyone to be respectful, and how her gentle but firm stand cut through the air like a cleansing wind. It wasn't just a reaction, it was a statement that even in a setting meant for celebration, decency and empathy mattered more than shallow mockery. In the days following the reception, I found myself retreating into solitude. I wasn't sure if I should call anyone or simply spend time with my own thoughts. I cancelled plans, skipped the usual weekend hangouts, and locked myself in my small apartment. At first, the isolation was painful, a heavy reminder that the life I thought I had, built on years of shared memories, was crumbling. I spent hours on the balcony, staring into the night sky, trying to reconcile the hurt with the strange spark of hope ignited by her words. Her defense of me, even though brief and unexpected, stirred something deep inside, an acknowledgement that my simple life, which I'd always taken pride in, wasn't as insignificant as I'd been led to believe. I began journaling relentlessly, every word pouring out like therapy. I wrote about the hurt, the anger, the confusion, and then, slowly, about the realization that I had the power to rebuild. I remembered the days when I cherished the quiet, reading a book in my favorite armchair, cooking my favorite meals without the pressure of pretense. I started to see that my simple life was not a weakness but a sanctuary, a space where authenticity and self-care reigned, far away from the glitter and superficial judgments of high society events. Those reflections, raw and honest, slowly began to transform my despair into resolve. I decided I needed to understand what had led to that moment at the wedding. Over the following week, I reached out to a few old friends, the ones who had known me before things got tangled up in the drama of relationships. Over late-night drinks at a quiet, dimly lit bar, I listened as they recounted their own experiences with rejection and self-doubt. One friend, Lisa, told me, "Sometimes people can be so blinded by their own ego that they forget what real respect means. You deserve better than being their joke." Her words, simple yet profound, made me realize that I wasn't alone in feeling undervalued. Many of us have had to fight against the tide of superficial expectations. In those conversations, I also learned that my ex had always had a penchant for flaunting his successes and, unfortunately, putting others down to elevate himself. I began to see that his cruel remark wasn't a reflection of my worth at all, but rather a desperate, insecure attempt to assert dominance in a room full of people he hoped would admire him. And then there was his bride. Her reaction had been so unexpected that it forced me to question everything. I'd thought she was complicit in his arrogance, but her intervention had shown me that even among the glamorous, there are those who value decency over showmanship. That realization was a turning point for me. I started to wonder if perhaps I'd been clinging to an outdated view of success, a belief that grand gestures and lavish lifestyles were the only measures of worth. My simple life, the life I'd built with honesty and care, suddenly felt like a treasure rather than a liability. I began to explore new interests that celebrated simplicity. I started cooking new recipes, experimenting with fresh ingredients, and rediscovered the joy of creating something nourishing out of the simplest of elements. I took up long walks in the nearby park, where I found solace in nature's quiet resilience, a reminder that beauty doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers in the rustle of leaves and the gentle sway of trees. In the midst of all this introspection, I also reconnected with my creative side. I dusted off my old guitar, something I hadn't played in years, and spent evenings strumming away my sorrows. Music, with its raw ability to translate emotion into melody, became a refuge. I even started writing a few songs about the experience, tracks that captured the irony of being mocked at a wedding, the sting of rejection, and the surprising spark of hope that had emerged in the chaos. The act of writing and playing music gave me a sense of control over my narrative, a way to transform the bitter into something beautiful. I wasn't ready to jump back into the dating scene, and I didn't plan to chase after reconciliation with my ex. Instead, I focused on rediscovering and rebuilding my own identity. I took classes, cooking classes, creative writing workshops, even a short course in photography, to nurture the parts of me that had been neglected in the whirlwind of relationship drama. Each new skill I learned, every creative endeavor, reaffirmed my belief that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's shallow standards. I began to see my simple life as a canvas, one that I could fill with colors of genuine passion, self-love, and personal growth. At the same time, I kept an eye on the wedding circle. I noticed that while my ex continued to bask in the glow of his high-profile wedding, there were subtle cracks in the facade. I heard whispers that his new bride, though initially lauded for her poise, was struggling with her own family's disapproval and had grown distant as the wedding festivities wore on. It was as if the universe was balancing the scales. What he had given as a cheap shot was coming back to haunt him. I couldn't help but feel a mix of vindication and sorrow at that realization. Vindication, because it affirmed that my feelings had been valid all along, and sorrow, because it reminded me that even the glitteriest weddings hide their own secrets and disappointments. One particularly reflective afternoon, I met up with one of my college friends, Aaron, who had also been through a messy breakup a few years back. We sat in a quiet corner of a local coffee shop, and he listened intently as I recounted every detail of the wedding, the cruel mockery, the stunned silence after the bride's unexpected intervention, and the ensuing whirlwind of emotions that followed. Aaron said something that stuck with me. Sometimes, when people see you for who you really are, it's like they start to realize that your life isn't meant to be measured in flashy gestures. It's the simple things that make you whole. That resonated deeply. In that conversation, I began to see that my life, simple, steady, and unassuming, had a strength and authenticity that was often overlooked by those who chased after superficial glory. As days turned into weeks, I slowly started to build a routine that was entirely my own. I embraced the quiet mornings and the reflective evenings. I made it a habit to write in my journal every day, capturing my thoughts, feelings, and the small victories that gradually accumulated. I found that each entry helped me piece together a fuller picture of who I was becoming, a person who valued authenticity over pretense, depth over dazzle. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but a slow, steady process of healing and self-discovery. I also immersed myself in new experiences. I joined a book club that focused on autobiographies and memoirs, drawn by the raw honesty of others' life stories. I attended local art exhibitions and even started volunteering at a community center, where I helped organize events for underprivileged kids. These activities broadened my horizons and reminded me that there was a whole world out there, one that appreciated genuine human connection and heartfelt stories over ostentatious displays of wealth and status. Throughout all this, I kept revisiting that pivotal moment at the wedding. I would often think, what if I had done something different? But then I realized that every painful moment was part of the journey that had led me to this place of newfound clarity. My ex's callous remark, while devastating, had forced me to confront the truth about what I valued, and what I was willing to tolerate. It was a harsh wake-up call that set me on a path to rediscover my self-worth, independent of anyone else's validation. By the time I'd settled into this new chapter of my life, I was no longer haunted by the echo of those words. Instead, I saw them as a catalyst for my reinvention. I'd learned to celebrate the simple joys, reading a good book, enjoying a quiet cup of coffee at sunrise, and spending lazy afternoons with friends who valued authenticity over appearance. I embraced my own rhythm, and in doing so, I found that the more I loved and accepted my simple life, the more I attracted people who did the same. I realized that true strength isn't about chasing grand achievements or collecting accolades, it's about being comfortable in your own skin and pursuing a life that feels right to you, regardless of what anyone else might say. And while the sting of that wedding night would never completely fade, it no longer defined me. Instead, it became a powerful reminder of the day I decided to take charge of my own narrative, a day that forced me to step out from the shadows and build a future that was authentically mine. In those quiet, reflective moments, I discovered that life is full of unexpected lessons. My journey wasn't about winning or losing at someone else's game, it was about finding the courage to live by my own rules. Every setback, every harsh word, every tear shed became a stepping stone towards a more resilient, more self-assured version of myself. And while the road ahead was still uncertain and occasionally rough, I knew that I was finally ready to embrace it, one day, one honest moment at a time. You know, looking back now, I realize that the worst days can lead to the best breakthroughs. After that night at the wedding and all the soul-searching that followed, I slowly began to see my life in a whole new light. The painful sting of being mocked as just a roommate had gradually faded into the background, replaced by a fierce determination to build a life that was entirely my own. I spent countless hours reflecting on what truly mattered to me, not the glitter of high society weddings or shallow accolades, but the simple, authentic moments that defined who I am. In the weeks after that unforgettable evening, I made a conscious choice. I was done letting others dictate my self-worth. I dove headfirst into new projects and pursuits. I enrolled in a creative writing class and started a blog to chronicle my journey. Every time I sat down to write, it felt like therapy, a way to untangle the raw emotions of rejection and rebuild my identity from scratch. I began sharing my stories of struggle, resilience, and the small victories that came with each new day. And to my surprise, people resonated with it. Comments rolled in from strangers who admitted that they, too, had felt diminished by someone's careless words. In that space, I found community and validation that had been missing for far too long. I also found solace in music. I dusted off my old guitar and started writing songs about the roller coaster of emotions I'd experienced, from the crushing hurt at that wedding to the slow awakening that followed. There were nights when I'd sit by my window, strumming softly under the glow of streetlights, and the melodies carried away the bitterness, replacing it with hope. Music became my refuge, a way to channel all the raw energy into something beautiful. I even performed at a small open mic night at a local bar. Standing there, sharing my story in song, I felt like I was finally reclaiming the narrative. I wasn't just the guy everyone had once laughed at, I was a survivor, an artist, and someone who had the strength to reinvent himself. At the same time, I began to reconnect with old friends and build new relationships that weren't tainted by past disappointments. I made an effort to surround myself with people who truly cared about who I was, not what others thought. Over coffee meetups, casual dinners, and even a few spontaneous weekend trips, I rediscovered the value of genuine connection. It was incredible how much a simple conversation could remind me that I wasn't alone, that many of us have been through our own battles with rejection and self-doubt. In these new circles, I found mentors, confidants, and friends who celebrated my progress and supported my dreams. They helped me see that my simple life wasn't a curse but a strength, a reminder that authenticity beats pretense any day. Of course, the journey wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There were nights when the old wounds would flare up unexpectedly. Sometimes, I'd catch myself reminiscing about that wedding, the flash of laughter, the cruel tone, and even the brief moment of hope sparked by his bride's unexpected defense. In those quiet moments, I'd feel the ache of loss all over again. But over time, I learned to face those memories head-on without letting them dictate my mood. I realized that every scar had a story, and every painful moment was a stepping stone to becoming the person I'm meant to be. I began to see my past as a chapter, not the whole book, one that had shaped me but wouldn't define me forever. In the midst of all these personal shifts, my professional life also took on new meaning. Even though I wasn't interested in rehashing old conflicts or getting back at my ex for his callous remarks, I did decide to channel my creative energy into a side project. I started developing an app that helped people plan travel itineraries tailored to their unique tastes, an idea inspired by the countless hours I'd spent dreaming about life's possibilities. It wasn't a grand venture like I'd once envisioned, but it was something real, something mine. Every line of code, every brainstorming session with a small, scrappy team of like-minded folks, was a reminder that innovation and passion are still within me. And as the project slowly took shape, I began to believe that I could build something meaningful from the wreckage of my past. One of the most unexpected and gratifying moments came when I was invited to speak at a local conference on personal growth and reinvention. I remember stepping onto the stage, a mixture of nerves and excitement churning inside me, and looking out at the audience. I shared my story, the heartbreak of that wedding, the pain of being mocked, and the long, sometimes lonely road to reclaiming my identity. I talked about how the hurtful words forced me to dig deep, to question who I was, and ultimately, to build a life that truly reflected my values. The response was overwhelming. I received messages from people thanking me for my honesty, for inspiring them to stand up for themselves. It was a humbling experience that reinforced the idea that our struggles can be powerful catalysts for change. Over time, I also came to understand that forgiveness isn't about excusing the actions of those who hurt you, it's about freeing yourself from the burden of anger. I never fully reconciled with my ex or the people who had once belittled me, but I learned to let go of the resentment that had weighed me down for so long. I began to focus on what I could control, my own choices, my own growth, my own happiness. I realized that I didn't need validation from anyone else to know my worth. That simple truth, though hard one, became the cornerstone of my new identity. As I settled into my new routine, balancing work, creative pursuits, and meaningful relationships, I started to appreciate the beauty of my simple life. I discovered that there was immense strength in being genuine, in embracing the everyday joys that many overlook. I'd cook meals with fresh ingredients, savor quiet moments with a good book, and take long walks to clear my mind. Every small pleasure became a victory over the noise of a past filled with judgment and cruelty. Now, looking ahead, I feel a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. I'm not defined by the cruel words that were once hurled at me or by the shallow standards of a world obsessed with flash and superficiality. I am defined by my own journey, a journey of self-discovery, resilience, and the quiet determination to live a life that is true to who I am. The path isn't always clear, and there are days when the old doubts creep in, but I've learned that I have the power to rise above them. I've begun to set new goals that excite me, plans for furthering my education, expanding my side project, and even dreaming up ways to give back to the community that supported me during my darkest hours. I want to be someone who not only achieves personal success but also helps others see the value in their own simple, authentic lives. I'm passionate about building bridges, fostering real connections, and proving that success isn't measured by ostentatious displays or shallow accolades, it's measured by the depth of your character and the strength of your convictions. Every morning, as I wake up in my small apartment filled with memories of my journey and the promise of a new day, I remind myself that I am enough. I have learned that true fulfillment comes from embracing who you are and letting your inner light shine, no matter how dim the world around you might seem. My simple life, once ridiculed and dismissed, has become a source of profound joy and quiet strength. And that realization, more than anything else, has set me free. So here I stand today, at the threshold of a future that I am building piece by piece, a future that is not defined by anyone else's expectations, but by the power of my own dreams and the courage to pursue them. I've taken the pain of rejection, the sting of humiliation, and the long road of self-doubt, and I've turned them into stepping stones on the path to a life that is uniquely mine. And while I know there will always be challenges ahead, I also know that I have the resilience to overcome them, the wisdom to learn from them, and the strength to keep moving forward. As I wrap up this chapter of my story, I want you to know one thing. No matter how harshly someone might try to label you or define your worth, your value lies in the truth of who you are. I'm not just the guy who was once mocked at a wedding. I'm a person who has risen from the ashes, who has learned to embrace his imperfections, and who now stands proud of the simple, authentic life I lead. My journey has taught me that every ending is just the start of something new, and that, sometimes, the most unassuming lives hold the most profound stories.